All right. Well, welcome everyone to the October meeting of the Rotary E-Club of Southeast USA and Caribbean. This evening, I am very honored to introduce our speaker, Mr. Dick Schultz. He is a member of the Rotary Club of St. Pete Sunrise, which is in District 6950, our home district proper. He is going to talk to us about polio, the Polio Plus movement, polio eradication. If I'm sure most of you know, October 24th is World Polio Day. And Mr. Schultz is a polio survivor and was very enthusiastic when we asked him to speak with us. So give you a little short synapse here. Involvements and likes. He is involved in the International Yachting Fellowship of Rotarians, Tampa Bay Fleet Commodore. He's past Commodore in 1999. He enjoys boating and good food. He's a charter member of the Rotary Action Group, Polio Survivors and Associates. This Rotarian Action Group for Polio Survivors and Associates is the living legacy of the Rotary Polio Plus polio eradication program through humanitarian assistance to polio survivors of the world. This action group operates in accordance with Rotary international policy, but is not controlled by Rotary. He's also an active Polio Plus supporter. And with that short introduction, Mr. Schultz, I will turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here. I was going to talk about crabbing and oyster shucking in Magoo Lake, but you know, you're stuck with the polio thing, I guess. At any rate, my favorite poster is this guy right here. He has got that look. This is out of the Rotary magazine, of course, but so I kind of start off with that. And then of course, sometimes I wear my shirt, but you know, it's a little warm here in Florida, so I don't wear it tonight. But at any rate, so much for that. I'm going to bring up, whoops, nope. Somehow or other, going to try and get my thing up and see if you see that. Hello, share. How do we do that? Alicia, help. Somehow or other, Alicia, you're muted, but.
You should be good to go. You've got share screen.
Yeah. Okay. Hit what do I need to do? Hit share.
Yeah.
Okay. Share. Okay. Let's see what happens here. I'm not real. Well, that got me to an email. That didn't work. Nuts. Well, I hate to be burning up dead air time, but let's see where we go here. If I open PowerPoint, well, I'm not sure if I'm hitting the right buttons here. No. Well, to open the PowerPoint so you can see it, I'm in my program, my PowerPoint, but.
I'll go ahead and see if I can't download it from the email you sent me. If you could tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I started out in 1941 getting sick from swimming in what turned out to be a semi-polluted lake in North Florida. And so at 22 months, I contracted polio and wound up with what turns out to be a rather minor disability. It slowed me down, but convinced me to be a type A personality. And so we went forward. So that was 80 years ago, this July, and we're still kicking, as it were. And if we can just get squared away on the PowerPoint, I'll be able to show you a good bunch of stuff. We, as you know, started out with eradicating polio worldwide in 1985 with our local Clearwater, then RI international president, Herb Brown. And polio was running rampant throughout the Philippines. And so Herb said, hey, let's go see if we can stop it. They did. And so by 1988, they had polio eradicated in the Philippine Islands, which was a major feat because of all the small islands everywhere. And then so Rotary president then put out a request, an RFP, if you will, for what Rotary International might do as a major project for the coming years. And 2 or 3 people, doctors and otherwise, said, hey, we need to eradicate polio worldwide. It'll be the second time in world history that a virus has been eradicated, smallpox being the first. And so they took it on. What happened thereafter was the formation of a partnership. Rotary knew we had the 1.2 million members around the world with 35,000 clubs. So we had the manpower to deliver the vaccine, but we didn't quite know what we might best do or how to do it. So they contacted the CDC and said, hey, how do we put this vaccine out to the various places where it needs to go? They contacted UNICEF saying, hey, we need help getting the attention of all the leaders of all these countries, so they'll let us come into the country and do this vaccination work. And then they needed to be able to track and control the information flow. So they contacted the World Health Organization, WHO. And so that made up the 4 original partners of what became the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, a 4-group partnership. Later on in 2007, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came along and said, hey, we're sitting on all this money we don't need. So, you need a few $100 million. And we said, yeah. And so that brought them in. And then a few years later, the Gates Foundation had developed a organization called Gavi, G-A-V-I, I guess it is, which was in the process of making all kinds of vaccines around the world. So at any rate, so then those joined the global initiative. And so it became a partnership of 6 groups, or 6 people involved. In 1988, there were some, as you may have certainly heard, some 350,000 cases a year of polio around the world. And we've knocked that down to last year to some 30 or 40 around the world. And those were in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I'm happy to announce that as of today, we've not had a wild polio case since last December anywhere in the world. And as of this week, we've also not detected a sample in any of our labs of a wild polio case. So that's a major achievement. And thankfully it happened before things went awry in Afghanistan. So you might ask, so now what are we doing? Well, 18, 20 months ago, COVID became a problem. And due to Rotary's vast experience in running a eradication campaign, having some 100 laboratories around the world that could test for things, having the management organization to control and distribute and put together the information of where an outbreak was occurring because of who. Even though we might not trust them in China, they certainly have been a big help in Africa and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So Rotary Plus, the part of Polio Plus, became a major help to the world in that we took on the COVID vaccine distribution using or being used by CDC and others to get the vaccines out there and determine where the worst part, outbreaks were occurring. So let's see. That gets us to the point that today we have in Afghanistan still some possibilities of polio, not wild polio, but the circulating derived polio, which is an offshoot of when you take the live vaccine, the polio vaccine, and it's in a kid's tummies, as it were. Sometimes that mutates, and so if there are large areas of where the vaccine has not been given, that mutation might be picked up by those kids, and that gets us to this circulating vaccine problem. So that then, and that was starting to occur throughout Africa 2.5 years or so ago. So that's where the Gavi vaccine manufacturing came in, and they developed a new second polio vaccine, which would go after that circulating polio strain, as it were. So that laboratory is producing the vaccine and is now being distributed throughout some 6 different areas of the world where this circulating polio is becoming rampant, because the wild polio vaccinations weren't high enough percentage of the population to prevent this mutation to happen. It's a lot like what we've experienced now with COVID-19, having all these different, there's some 20 different mutations of COVID-19, Delta being the most prevalent and the most infectious, I guess is the way to put it. So Alicia, how you doing? Getting anywhere? 1 minute, she says. Okay. It's the pretty pictures I want to show you, but at any rate. So that gets us pretty much to today. Here we go. So there we are. Okay. Gotcha. So at any rate, Polio Plus has always been a two-factor thing, getting rid of polio and then also distributing MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella, and all these other vaccines that we can get into these countries. So some countries will say, hey, come along, but we need you to do this, that, and thus while you're also doing the polio vaccine. And so we've done that. So that's the case where polio has taken the lead, and we now are getting close to where our goal is global polio eradication. We know that to date, some 20 million children have been saved from the paralysis of polio, and that is a major help. So how do we go down here? Okay, use the slide. So as I said earlier, Rotary started this thing. We made the partnership of Global Polio Eradication Initiative, GPEI. And in the last few years, donor countries such as the UAE, the United Kingdom, and Germany have really pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into the continuing eradication process. So how do we do this? Okay, here we go. So as I said earlier, the global initiative was made up of first Rotary, second CDC, third UNICEF, and then the World Health Organization. And now today we have the Gates Foundation and the Gavi Vaccine Alliance also involved. And these 6 people get together twice or 3 times a year to determine what's happening, to improve plans that are in place and go forward. So the next slide, are you doing that, Alicia? So this is an old picture I pulled up. As you may remember, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was always a poster child of a polio kid on crutches, pulling at your heartstrings. Today, as we watch TV, there are some 20 or 30 different groups doing the same kind of a thing. So the next slide we go to, do I hit plus? What do we do? So the stats today I talked about, the type 2 novel oral polio vaccine developed by the Gates group has been rolled out across Africa. And so that's our next situation. But our world goal is the wild polio. And so anyway, on to another topic. October today is a busy month for we Rotarians. So I'm going to pound the drum for my Rotary Club. This Saturday, October 9th, we're having our, go back up. We're having our Shuffle, Brews, and Barbecue event. In the middle of the month, we've got the We're Still Here campaign that runs for a week. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then, of course, coming up on Sunday, October 24th, is World Polio Day. And that's basically starts about 4 p.m. here, and it's on Facebook. So everybody can log into it however they wish. So one more thing. So then we'll talk about each one of these activities that's going to happen. Okay, Sunrise Rotary is doing a Shuffle, Brews, and Barbecue event in the downtown St. Pete Shuffleboard Club on 4th Avenue North, I guess it is. And so, for a very minor, inexpensive donation, you get barbecue dinner and you get dessert and you get glasses of beer or wine, and you can play as much shuffleboard as you can stand. We're going to have a championship game so that somebody will go off with a trophy of some sort. And there'll be a silent auction where you have things such as widescreen TVs and some major items that will be auctioned off on a silent auction. And we have 50-50 drawings which go to support Polio Plus. Then the next slide we have, we're talking about We're Still Here. And then the next slide, we say that this campaign is important because there are some 11 to 15 million polio survivors worldwide, mostly in large countries like India, but everywhere. It's estimated in the United States we have some 400,000 polio survivors and some 50,000 in Florida. Now, I can tell you the last 4 months or so, 5 months, I've been taking part in Zoom meetings around the United States and Canada with post-polio support groups. And usually there's anywhere from 12 to 25 people involved who are all polios that are dealing with post-polio syndrome. Those Zoom meetings have been a wonderful, wonderful, impactful thing for all these people because they're able to share some of their problems and other people chime in with solutions that they've had. And it's just been a great way of transmitting information back and forth. So thanks to the Zoom people for making that possible. The other thing about We're Still Here is that supporting all of these survivors is very costly to the local organizations, local governments, and what have you. So, the impetus to erase polio is not only just to save the kids, but it's also to help save the economies. Then there's the other thing about it is that these folks have post-polio syndrome. Some 40 to 60% of the survivors come down with this syndrome some 25 to 35 years later. It's a big surprise when you've been a type A personality and you learn to water ski and race sports cars and sail sailboats and do all these things, and then along comes fatigue and pain and joint stuff and all the rest of it. And you say, what in the heck is going on? Well, it's not that you've caught polio again. It's just that all the motor neurons in the nerve system of your body that have been doing double duty, because half of the nerves were killed by the polio. And those survivors say, hey, I'm done with you. I put up with this for the last 30, 40 years, and I'm going to go on vacation. You can go sit down. So at any rate, that's kind of the way that works. So next slide, we have the third element of October, and that's World Polio Day coming up Sunday. And I don't know, some of you hopefully have seen it the last couple of years, but it's fun to watch around the world segments of entertainment, of singing and dancing and people entertaining us one way or another in tribal dress or dress of their country. So it's a little bit like going to a international convention and being there that first night for when everybody comes in with the flags and going to the various meetings. So World Polio Day via Zoom, via Facebook is a great way of pulling that together. So Rotary does good stuff without even being asked. It's amazing how everybody jumps in and does their part. So then the next slide, we come down to the fact that if you want to access the World Polio Day, you can simply go to www.facebook.com/Rotary/ and along about 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, that'll work for you. So let's see. Here we go down to the money game. And that is that for the current 5-year period, which would be 1999 through 2023, I think. The goal has been to annually raise about $150 million. And so if Rotary can pull in 50 million, the Gates Foundation does a 2-for-1 match on that. And we wind up being able to pump 150 million into the Polio Plus programs. And we did that last year quite well, and we can do it again. So, and then on the next slide, we talk about the Rotary National Polio Plus committees, of which there are dozens broken down. And that's what I was talking about earlier with the management aspect that Rotary has brought to fore. We have the vaccine carriers who are using to get the transport both the polio vaccine and now also the COVID-19 out into the deal, and bringing back specimens which are then analyzed by those 100 labs. And that's why it still costs a great deal of money, some $1.2 billion a year to support this operation. We have these 100 labs around the world, and they have employees which like to get paid, plus the cost of running the lab. So, but that's necessary so we can determine where there are problems and where to go stamp it out. We have the resource centers, and that's testing sites. Plus gets involved with food rationing and providing food to needy people. We provide PPE, personal protection equipment, to keep people from getting the disease, if that's possible. And we got the Rotary established religious leader committee, which is focused in India. And that's important because in some areas, as we know, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Muslims created all kinds of problems for our getting getting the ladies to be able to deliver the vaccine to the mothers. And so those leaders have come to the fore and made things happen. So the next slide, we talk about Rotary National Polio Plus committees, and I've pretty well covered that, I think. When COVID first broke out, it was a matter of quickly being able to convert our labs to testing for COVID and kicking in our management system. And then the next slide, we have simple acts are critical in developing areas. Next slide, please. And it's just simple acts that happen during the delivery process of the vaccine. And here we have a very courageous lady who's out in the streets to give vaccine to kids. And oftentimes the simple thing of helping people clean their hands gets acceptance to get in to help take care of the kids. And then the next slide, we talk about unseen needs are also in the plus column, the polio plus column. And it's all kinds of different things, providing masks, providing food, doing COVID testings, and you'll pardon my ship's clock going nuts. But at any rate, and even testing in leper colonies in the slums of Delhi, India. So, and cooking food for folks. So it's amazing all the offshoots. So I would mention now that we're afoot doing a new honorarium thing, and that is the design and manufacture, if you will, of a bronze polio immunization workers memorial in Evanston, Illinois, as a permanent tribute to immunization workers who have lost their lives immunizing children. There's some, I'm not sure of the actual number, but I'm sure it's somewhere between 30 and 50 women have been murdered by various groups within the Taliban organization, the Al-Qaeda, and etc. The Taliban is a multifaceted group, and they don't have much control over each other, as it turns out. So then in the next slide, I would say, our goal is to end polio, and we will get it done. And the next slide, please, is saying that the beginning of this process starts tonight. We keep talking about, end polio now, and we're this close and all these other things, but, it's a matter of keeping after it. So I'm going to remain a senior active Rotarian, a polio survivor Rotary Action Group ambassador, until we put this nasty back in the smallpox box and so forth. So you ain't rid of me yet, as it were. And then the next and the last slide, I would say it's been an 80-year voyage to deal with the minor disability. I wound up with a left leg that was smaller than the right leg and a drop foot, and had to wear a brace until I was about 14, when a major operation was done and I was able to throw the brace away. So as a kid, I was dealing with the limitations and trying to avoid being noticed, and then deal with the disaster of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In 1990, when that came out, the unintended consequence was major corporations quickly figured out they didn't want to hire anybody with a disability, because they knew they couldn't fire them or retire them, and they would be stuck with them and that medical cost component. So the American with Disabilities Act really kind of screwed up a lot of people who wanted to work but weren't allowed to. So then in 1988, I recognized what was my post-polio syndrome, and it was starting, and it comes on very sneakily, very slowly, one little thing at a time, and you hardly know what's happening until you look back and say, oh, I can't do that thing anymore. So at any rate, so in 1988, I engaged with the wonderful Rotary #1 project to eradicate polio worldwide, and I'm happy to have been able to have some kind of a information conduit in that regard. And so now it's your turn to get it done. And that completes my program, as it were. Well, anyway.
All right. Well, that's great. glad we were able to get the slides up for you. Any questions?
Dick, I have a quick question. What is the range of symptoms of post-polio syndrome? Does it go from very minor all the way to back to kind of where you were at the beginning with full disability, or what?
Well, right after you get through with the actual virus sickness, you start to find out that you've got various limitations, paralysis of an arm or a leg or both, or one half side, and unfortunately, if you've got the bulbar, three types of polio. So the bulbar is the worst because that affects the diaphragm, which then means that the lungs aren't being exchanging air. And that's when you wind up in an iron lung. And most of those folks didn't make it very long. The untold story is that iron lungs kept you alive for a while, but it wasn't a long-term project. So at any rate, as right after having survived the sickness, you wind up with rapid fatigue, you wind up with joint pain. One of the problems with polio is that it through the back end of the brain, down through all the nervous systems, various of the axon nerves, which are the little guys that are shaped like a AAA battery. They've got a plus side and a negative side. And the polio tends to wipe out one of those, whether it's the plus or the negative. So you don't get a connection from one to the other and go through millions of those from the brain down to, say, the ankle or the leg muscle that controls the ankle. What happens is for the polio, when you get rid of that connection, you lose that connection, the muscle just contracts and the leg contracts. And so moving the leg back out straight is very, very painful. Hence the, I can't remember her name, the Sister Kenny came along and said, hey, let's take hot, wet wool blankets and put them on those muscles and keep those legs and those arms stretched out long. Otherwise, they will remain cranked up all the rest of your life. So that was the problem. So to get to your question, Will, you get past all this, you get back to walking, you get back to moving around, you get back to using your hands or whatever, and you get on with life and you learn how to live with whatever paralysis you may have. Then some 25, 30 years later, as I said earlier, all those neurons and muscles which have been doing double duty were overused, worn out, what have you, and slowly they started to take a hike. And so slowly you started to get fatigued quicker. You started to get muscle discomfort because you use your arm too much and it starts to hurt because it's sore, like tennis elbow, what have you. And so there's the fatigue, the muscle pain, the joints start to come back together, bone on bone. It's kind of like an arthritis situation. And you get some, but not very much mental acuity. And that starts very slowly, as I said. It kind of sneaks up, and one day you realize that when you go to put something in a slot, you need both hands to do it. So it gets to a point though that where it's not like having the polio sickness again. It's just the results of the overuse of all of those muscles, those nerves, those whatever. And there's the other side of this thing is the doctors in the United States, particularly the young ones, have no idea what polio is because they never had to deal with it. In the 40s and the 50s, the doctors were dealing with it everywhere. But since that time, all those doctors have retired and gone on to their reward. And so now when you think you've got post-polio syndrome and you go see a doctor, he's clueless. So one of the things that these support groups around the world really are doing is re-educating our doctors on what to do and how to diagnose and how to treat or not mistreat a situation. You know, the old exercise thing of use it or lose it, that is an absolute no-no for a polio. Quite the opposite. It's don't use it, conserve it and keep it. So there's things like that that go on. And the the Rotary's action group was started in what was it? That was 2000 or so. I was in Chicago with a bunch of other guys, and we had a meeting about, you know, what could Rotary do to help the folks that had polio that were Rotarians. Very difficult to get a Rotarian to raise their hand and say, hey, I had polio. You know, it's something you don't want to admit sometimes, particularly to an employer. So, but anyway, so a bunch of us started this thing called, you know, the Post-Polio group, which has become into a new group called a Rotary Action Group, because Rotary did not want us waving that flag that polio existed while they were trying to wipe it out. It was contrary to the push, as it were. And we understood that, hey, you know, we'll just stand over here on the side and wait for you guys to wipe it out, and then here we come. So that's kind of where we are today. Is kind of the beginning of the recognition of those some 50,000 folks in Florida who are post-polio or survivors. And you'll see it more and more as it comes along. So did I answer your question, Will?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dick. And thanks for all you do.
Well, you know, talking is easy. Doing is a different thing.
Dick, hi there, and thanks very much. You know, it's one thing to get a report from someone that is reading some data, or has been for a while. It's quite another to get an update from someone that's had it and can give you some experiences that they've had. So we really appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. Just wanted to let you know that I was at the Zone Summit over the weekend, and we got an update from Rotary International President-elect Jennifer about polio and about the communications with the Taliban. And so this is pretty recent information, so I thought I'd pass it along to everybody. She said that there have been continued communications with them about polio eradication, that they're very open to making sure that it continues, that they don't want to see their children sick either, and that at least for right now, you know, who knows what's going to happen in a week for that matter, but at least for right now, that eradications are continuing to go on. There continues to be a communication. They continue to be open and cooperating with it. So I just thought I'd throw that out and let you know that. She also said we have had 2 cases this year of polio, which is not very many compared to what we have had, but we have had 2.
Yeah, that was in January, but none
correct.
Since. Yeah,
that's correct. That's correct. So anyway, I thought that was some very good news, and hopefully it continues. We'll see how long it continues, but it's very good news.
Well,
thank you again. Thank you.
And getting that fresh news from Zone is always good. You know, there's tidbits come out. We knew that we had in certain areas of Afghanistan the help of the various segments of the Taliban that didn't want the people in their village getting polio, so they were helping. In other areas, not so much, particularly over on the Pakistani border, where the really radical folks are. And that's where these recent 8 killings occurred. Here again, they didn't want women doing something that they thought men should be doing. So, but yeah, it is what it is. So, any other good questions? Yeah, Raymond.
Well, first of all, I think I'd like to nominate Alicia as the Rotary Technology Person of the Year. She does amazing things. No, I just a comment. I was reading an article in the New York Times maybe a week ago, and I was surprised. We're very much aware of the resistance to vaccines for COVID. But I was very much surprised to learn that back when the polio vaccine was made available, there were also protests and resistance. There were like 4,000 parents, I think, in the state of Maryland who absolutely refused to have their children vaccinated. A couple counties in Indiana thought it was socialized medicine. So, the resistance is not something new. I think the difference is that back then it was not politicized or partisan, but they did have some resistance.
Well, part of the problem was, and as you may note, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a major support group with the March of Dimes. But when that first vaccine came out, they were making it in 2 or 3 or 4 different labs around the United States. And there was a lab in California that made a bad batch of vaccine. And that went out and caused a lot of kids to catch polio. And so that word got out nationwide. And so a lot of people said, hey, your vaccine is killing my kids. We ain't going there. So they made a major push through all the media throughout the nation about the fact that they caught the batch from this lab and they, cleaned the whole lab out and started all over again. So that gave rise to some of the resistance that you're talking about, Raymond. And you're always going to get resistance. And it took us from 1955 to 1963 or so before we ever reached like 70% of vaccination rate. And a lot of that was due to the fact that the state said, hey, when your child is born, you should get them vaccinated. And the school system said, hey, if you want your kid to come to school, you got to have this vaccination kit for smallpox and and polio, because we don't want to spread it. And at that point in time, during the 50s, everybody had a very, very vivid memory of all the movie theaters shutting down, the swimming pools shutting down, the restaurants shutting down, people being quarantined in their neighborhood or their home. It was a very real fear thing that occurred every summer. My mother was driving us home from Washington, D.C. in 1948, and she got caught speeding in North Carolina. And the state trooper said, ma'am, you can't be going that fast in North Carolina. And she says, well, I got a son back here who caught polio, and you've got an outbreak, and we're going to get out of here as fast as we can. And so he let us go, but he says, hey, cool it a little bit. So, but there was a lot of fear throughout the United States about that. And that will take place in the United States as it has to do with COVID. It just takes time. Thank you for the comments and thoughts. Debbie, did I get your answers? Well, Alicia and Will, thank you for having me come along. We hope some of you can come to our shuffleboard event this Saturday in downtown St. Pete. We will not be wearing masks because we're going to be outdoors, and we will be having a good time. But because it is outdoors and folks can kind of stay apart, you're welcome to wear a mask if you like, but.
Well, you might see a couple of us. We're relatively local. Basically, everybody on the screen now represents everywhere from North Florida to South Florida. So, yeah, but there's a few of us that are close enough. Who knows? We'll see. We'd love to join in.
Thanks so much, Dick. And again, thank you for what you do for for Rotary's polio efforts, and also for your work as past Commodore of the International Fellowship of Yachting Rotarians.
Yes.
Yeah, we like our canoes as well, you know.
Yes, yes. I never will forget the first IYFR meeting I went to, and you said, "Hey, has everybody got enough beer here at the table?" And somebody reminded you that we need to start a meeting, and which wrapped up very, very quickly to make sure that everybody had more beer. So that's kind of Rotary meeting I like.
That was.
Well,
it was good.
that started back in the 50s. There was a rule that we would have rendezvous at various places, at various yacht clubs from Sarasota to Tampa and hither and yon. And we would always, all the guys would get together and supposedly have a meeting. It was just a way to get away from the wives, but at any rate, and there was a 2-drink minimum. Everybody would order 2 drinks to start off with. And the meeting would be called to order, and the stopwatch would start. And when it got to 45 seconds, the meeting would be canceled. So you had to talk quick if you had something important to say. So
There
at
you
any
go.
rate.
All right. Well, thanks, Dick. I really appreciated it.
Hmm.
Good talk. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to go over very quickly our next meeting lineup. Our next meeting, Zoom meeting, will be November 1st, and I will be in Ohio transmitting beep at my parents' place, where my father is actually the presenter, and he is going to be talking about artificial lighting and growing greenhouse crops, i.e. tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cucumbers, with LEDs versus what he has developed and patented is a strobe lighting, where he can actually grow crops within a closed like storage container. So that will be November. December, we will have our annual club meeting, which we will be talking about and voting on next year's club officers and BOD members and such like. In January, we will be having Zaid Abu Rahman, who, if you remember, was our S4TL student candidate, and he is going to be talking about his experience with S4TL. February, we will have our meeting with a special speaker from an entity called H2O for Life. And this is a group that teaches clean water practices, etc., to actually local elementary school children throughout the country, but they also benefit elementary students, school students in Africa, in places in Africa. We are open for suggestions in March and April. In May, we will have, hopefully, PDG Will Miller talking about maybe talking about what are you going to be talking about?
I'll be talking about Scotch and making money through recycling used wallboard.
How about disaster preparedness, dear?
About disaster preparedness.
Okay, because I mean,
for home and business.
Yes, we are a very truly international e-club. May precedes the month of June, which is the start of hurricane season down here in Florida and southeast of the country. June, we'll have our end of the Rotary year meeting, and that's a TBA also. So, any other comments for this evening? Yep, all good? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
And what information do you have coming up from the Caribbean, the Bahamas, as to the folks, Rotarians, getting over that last nasty Cat 5 hurricane? I know you were involved to some degree.
Yeah, we actually, well, we have as a club donated a shelter box. Now, doing that, there, you know, we don't have a say as where that shelter box goes. But Ray, did you have something to add?
No.
Okay.
Well, I think we've had an ongoing relationship with the island of Dominica. And the person who is really the contact for us is Robin. We
Right.
should probably follow up with him and see what is happening in Dominica
Yeah, that's
in terms of
correct.
polio and other issues.
Right. He was unable to make the meeting tonight, but we'll definitely do that and see where they stand. But that's what our club has done.
Some of my happiest days were spent in the Abacos, you know,
Nice.
fishing and diving and sailing and whatever else. So when they got wiped out, it was painful.
Yeah.
I think, Alicia, I just had to commend you on the speaker lineup that you have. You've got, sounds like you've got, except for a couple of months, you've got it pretty well covered for the year, and that's really great. So
Well,
in
thank
addition
you.
to technology, Ray, I think we should commend her for her speaker lineup.
Yes.
It's like putting a puzzle together, and I love puzzles. So, but I've got those 2 months, and I am definitely open to speaker ideas, and I've put that on the club meeting thread. You know, I like to focus on our club foci, which, you know, we have 3, and the focus or the Rotary focus of the month, the whatever the theme is. So I ask, you know, people, do your research, come up with ideas, or if anybody knows or has heard of listened to a speaker lately that you think might be interested in talking to the group. The really cool thing with the gentleman that I have speaking from H2O for Life, Will and I were actually watching a PBS, it was PBS NewsHour, and they did a segment on this group, and I said, I'm going to Google them. And I ended up sending an email out to them and got a response, and now we got a speaker. So
Good.
anyway, yep, cool. All fun. So let's see. Well, look at that. It's close to 8. We are wrapping up in time for the PDGs in this group. I ask you to stay tuned. Everybody else, we can finish our meeting with the 4-way test. And Will, I'm just gonna, I have to go for it, dear.
Yeah, I'm just lucky that way.
Yeah,
Since I live in this under the same roof. Yeah, even though it's a different room. The 4-way test are the things we think, do, and say. Is it the truth?
This is the truth.
Is
it
it
fair to all
fair to all concerned?
concerned?
Will it build
Will
goodwill
goodwill
and
and better friendship?
Will it be beneficial
Beneficial
to all concerned? And is it fun?
Whoop, whoop.
Okay.
Again, thank you, Dick. Great seeing you. Hollis, we'll get together sometime.
Yeah.
All right.
You see what Matt did?
Yeah.